So excited to have Allison Pickens on the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast interview series. For those who don't know, Allison is an amazing entrepreneur. She's helped build amazing companies like Gainsight, and now she is also doing her own investment fund where she finds and invests in some of the best, presumably the best, and hopefully the best and highest returning entrepreneurs that are out there. So I think you have a really unique perspective, Allison, on what it means to go build a company like Gainsight with you and Nick in really taking a company in a whole new industry that didn't exist before as a real thing, making it into something that was a real thing. And now, of course, turning around and saying, hey, can I apply the lessons that I've learned from that Gainsight experience and all the amazing other things you've done in your career and find those really good entrepreneurs that will have similar returns as what you saw at Gainsight. So I'd love to kind of kick it off there. Like what, and maybe even start like, why did you end up at Gainsight in the first place? And what was it like from really early on to doing a lot of the right things and probably a lot of the wrong things to get to where you ended?
Absolutely. So before I joined Gainsight, I was actually in a very different world. I was working in private equity investing, doing leveraged buyouts in Boston. But growing up on the East Coast, I didn't really know too many people who had started companies. But I had this very strong entrepreneurial bug. And eventually I ended up joining Gainsight because they were a Bain Capital Ventures portfolio company. And I was at Bain Capital doing PE. So I got to know the board member from Bain Cap and then got to know Nick, who was at the time the new CEO of the company. Unusual situation. He had taken over from the founder in a pretty early stage, had about 1 million in ARR, which Nick had, massed in late 2013. And then I joined in early 2014 as kind of a generalist challenge tackler, taking on a lot of different problem areas and opportunities that the company had. I think, if you had to distill our success to just a few factors, I think in the early days, the primary drivers of success were one, pure hustle, like founder-led sales was what we did, even though there were a couple of salespeople initially and they did a great job. I mean, I think for sure Nick tapping his network of SaaS company CEOs was frankly like really important. And SaaS companies at the time were our primary customer base. And I also personally did a lot of cold calling and, just initial customer conversations, particularly in new verticals where we were trying to test out, do we have product market fit? So the first factor was, just pure hustle. A second important factor.
Do you think it's part of that initial hustle? Like what was it about Nick, you and that early team that gave you the initial hustle, right? In other words, like every founder likes to think they have a lot of hustle, but not all founders do, right? Not all entrepreneurs do. Like what is the differentiating factor around like that? What does like a real hustle look like to go get out there versus I think I have hustle, but I don't really?
That's a great question. I think it's the kind of thing where you know it when you see it. There's a sense of urgency that people operate with. I mean, bias for action is also a term that people use. I think there's this drive among a lot of founders to manifest things that they are feeling and that they have. And frankly, I think it's driven by a lot of anxiety, that you're really early stage and you're just like revving and you feel like you have this strong compulsion to like go do something and like that. So I think it kind of comes down to feeling. I think also founders who hustle have the mindset that there's nothing too difficult for them to try. I was talking to this amazing founder recently and she was saying, I've proven to myself over the years that I can literally tackle any problem. And certainly she knows that she can tap other people to help her with it, but there's nothing that she's afraid of trying. I think some founders I notice are a little afraid of trying to sell, for example, if they have technical backgrounds. So I think throwing yourself into the mix and, just sort of like putting your fear aside for the moment is a big part of it.
So essentially you're saying maybe part of entrepreneurial excellence is the willingness to sort of just ask and keep asking, right? Like, or another way to say is like, always be closing, right? Always be selling. That is your job, right? You can't be afraid of hearing no. Hopefully you're not afraid because you're just not afraid. But on top of it, presumably as a founder, you have such a deep belief in the vision and mission that you're trying to accomplish that you don't care if people say no to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly there's like a thick skin involved in this. I think great founders have great resilience, meaning they can bounce back from saying no, and they don't take no personally. They don't see it as an ego thing. They see it as like an opportunity to learn. Frankly, I was in a situation recently where I failed in a particular meeting, and I was so angry with myself. I remember, I'm pretty hard on myself. I think like a lot of entrepreneurial people, I was,
We all are.
no, like beat myself up. It was on a Friday. I beat myself up all weekend. And then on Monday, I was like, this is a learning experience. There are certain things I could have done differently. Maybe I shouldn't have even taken that meeting in the first place because I should have known better that it like wasn't going to be a fit for whatever reason. And I'm going to take that going forward and kind of move on. So get angry and then, get even with yourself.
And is that what you saw in some ways, like at Gainsight, where it's just like, look, we're coming to it, starting off, we're a small company, new CEOs coming in, Nick, founders getting sort of replaced, maybe not the right word, but like not being CEO anymore at least. And then just saying like, hey, we're just going to keep pushing away, like plugging away at it nonstop. We're small, but we have a long runway. Like what was the mindset behind that? Just keep plugging away and just say, we're going to go prove that this is something real and big, when there wasn't a market for customers. Like that wasn't a term that people thought about.
Yeah, that's right. I think when your category doesn't exist yet, ideally you've got a ready market, at least an initial ready market of people who believe what you believe and are ready to buy. I actually think, and I described this in one of my blog posts, the one on talent efficiency on my Substack, I talk about like 7 fundamentals of great companies. And one is that like your customers really are ready for you. I would say that there was a segment of the market that was really ready for us. And it was one of the reasons why we're able to grow from, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but something like 1 million in ARR to like 5 million in ARR the next year. Like incredible growth, particularly for like back then. But at the same time, I think that there's going to be a part of what you're doing where it's just about brute force, even if you've got this initial ready segment. And we did a lot of evangelism as a result. Everything from producing a ton of content. I mean, I personally wrote 100 blog posts over my time at Gainsight, started a podcast, wrote a book with Nick in 2020. The company wrote a couple other books as well. There was a hustle in terms of like getting the word out there, getting our content consumed. There was a hustle in terms of bringing people together so that early advocates could convince other people who were like not quite as early that this really was the next thing. We were really strategic in talking to different stakeholders in our ecosystem to get them convinced. So VCs, for example, we would go to them and say, you really should be telling your portfolio companies to report on net dollar retention and churn because those metrics actually matter and should be on your dashboard. Kind of shocking that wasn't true back then. But it took brute force actually to convince people of that.
How long did it take? So I certainly get like there's an early adopter market almost for everything, at least for many products that make some sense, right? Not every product, but like there's an early adopter market. So you can saturate that. How long did it take for the other stuff to start working in it? And I actually really my own personal perspective, right? I've talked with you about Levy's product and I know there's real value. We have clear market adoption for what we're doing. But it takes time to convince those early adopters, those sort of gatekeepers like the VCs to say, hey, look, every one of your startups should be using us because it's insane. They're wasting all this time. How long does that take to work, right? Like, I know it's a long journey and a process. And I as a founder, I've signed up for this 10-year journey that I'm on. But like, how long does that really take to work? And how long should you accept that time frame before you pivot and try something different from a marketing or sales perspective?
That's a great question. It kind of depends on what your capitalization is as a company. When VCs invest, they typically want to see you, this is not always true, but many VCs want to see you just execute on the growth plan. Get from 1 to 5 to 15 to 30, which is basically the trajectory that we ascended at Gainsight. But, if you're a bootstrap company or if you otherwise have the ability in your cap structure to be patient with your market, timing doesn't necessarily matter as much. Sometimes just being in the game and staying in the game allows you to ride the wave that comes 2 years from now, even if it's not there today.
So then tell me, like, what is the advice that you give to great entrepreneurs in the sense, like, look, you want to grow as fast as Gainsight did. but you want to do it in a sustainable way, right? Because I'm sure a lot of your customers or your investments today, they have a choice. They can say, I can put all this money I just got from Allison and all the other VCs into advertising, right? The fastest way to get marketing is advertising, but it's not particularly cost effective. It sounds like Gainsight maybe did both, or maybe didn't even do a lot of advertising. It was just like a ton of content marketing in evangelizing the market.
I think it makes a lot of sense for B2B companies in the early days to focus on, organic inbound. It's proof that the market is more ready for you. It's proof that you have the initial network that will allow you to sell in a, founder-led, very fast way. I think it's kind of the authentic way to build product market fit. And like advertising, like you really turn that on once you've got some kind of repeatable motion that you can scale. Because like you want to be able to, put that advertising led pipeline into a funnel and a sales process and a customer onboarding process that like produces predictable results. I think of advertising as fuel to the fire, but it makes sense to optimize, your CEO, your SEO for, the kinds of themes that you're evangelizing about.
So this is a pet peeve of mine because so many founders I find wait way too long to start their marketing. They kind of say, hey, look, I want to build a product first before I can really go to market. And it's like step one, get product, step two, start marketing. I think it's the opposite. But what did you find at Gainsight? I mean, like obviously you guys had a product, but you had $1 million in ARR. Like it must have been a very basic version of, I'm sure, of what Gainsight is today. But you still went to market with this. Like what was the strategic thinking that you guys made and said, we're going to put a significant amount of time into marketing instead of product building? How did you and Nick think through that?
We definitely did both. I think in general, you're never done building your product. So there's not really this moment where like your product's done and then you can start marketing. I think actually you learn a lot from marketing in the early days about many topics, but including what to build in your product. If you're getting the word out there, you're testing your messaging, you're testing what pain points people have, what they're looking to get solved by you, that can help inform your roadmap. So I think like market, sell, build is a really good cycle to be in.
So walk me through. I mean, this is like our lightning round discussion, but walk me through when you look at founders today, right? You're looking for excellence. You're looking for that founder who has X, Y, and Z traits that you're like, this is going to make for a fantastic return for my LPs, for my fund, and obviously great for the team that I'm investing in. What are those qualities you try to optimize for or look for?
On the talent side, there are a couple of things that I care about in early stages. So one of them is a unique insight into a problem that's informed by authentic experience. So there are a couple pieces of that. Authentic experience means you've experienced the pain point yourself, or else have been like very deep in trying to solve for that pain point before for other people. I don't love the ivory tower approach to finding a startup to build. To me, that's like a lot more like what search funds do. And that might be an interesting asset class, but it's not the one that I'm focused on investing in. The unique insight part to me says, you have a different perspective on what the market needs from not just incumbents, but other startups that currently exist or could be built. So I look for contrarianism in the founders that I invest in. And I look for, secondly, the ability for these founders to communicate very concisely what that unique insight is. So I look for communication skills as like a second factor. To me, very concise communication signals that, first of all, it makes it easier for me to understand what you're doing, but also, to me, it's a signal of clarity of thought. If you can say something well, probably you are thinking well. And that great thinking, ensures that I can trust other things that you're telling me, and also that you have the intellectual ability to go build in a very complex environment, which is inevitably like what you're doing when you're building a company. And then finally, I look for entrepreneurs who are very strong, have very strong go-to-market intuition and hustle, even if they don't come from that background. Actually, I primarily invest in technical founders, but I think there's a certain kind of technical founder that has that kind of hustle quality that we talked about, They execute very quickly. They're able to learn very quickly. They don't have a lot of patience. I often notice that in our conversations, if they're talking really fast. This conversation actually is like that. So it's like, maybe Adam, I invested in your past company, Abstract Ops. So like, there's like kind of a probably reason for that.
Yep.
So yeah, the third thing is that like organic hustle.
Okay, so obviously you try to identify those things in your investments, but yet not all of your investments are going to work out. I mean, no venture capitalist is going to have all their investments work out. When you think back on the ones that have failed, what was like the miss, or where are things where you're like, hey, like this wasn't working right? Like that founder seemed like they had the right hustle and something broke along the way, or they were a great communicator with me as a VC, but they were terrible with their team. Like are there breakdowns that occurred where if you do like a retro on your investments, you came across like, okay, well, I'll try to do that better?
Yeah, great question. I would say that I'm 3 years into my fund, and it's still too early to have really had many failures. So I'm sure I will have them, but like the data's not that large where I can like detect patterns. I would say that in a handful of cases where things haven't worked out the way I wanted or don't seem to be working out in that direction, more likely. I think it's because I actually departed from my primary investing strategy in order to do the deal.
Yep.
And this is something I've just become like so disciplined about. I think when you're an investor, you have to have a very specific, narrow strategy. And you have to follow it every single time. Because one, there's a reason why you designed the strategy to begin with. It probably plays to your strengths better than anything. And therefore, you should keep investing in your strengths. It might seem like there's this shiny object over here that like you'd be crazy to pass up on, yep. But that shiny object is not in your wheelhouse. Stay away. And I think that's probably a great lesson for startups as well. Yep. So, having a narrow, like focused strategy doesn't mean you only invest in like this part of the dev tools ecosystem. It just means that you have a very consistent way of, following the specific criteria that you've laid out for yourself and checking those during diligence.
And do you think, I mean, one thing it sounds like you're saying, you didn't quite say it this way, so I don't want to put words in your mouth completely, but like you're basically saying a good investor, and potentially then in sort of question is like, is this also apply to entrepreneurs? Which actually, I think VCs in many cases, especially when you have your own fund, you are an entrepreneur. It's just an entrepreneur of a VC fund. But it's no different. Yeah. You have people you need to raise money from. You have people you have to report to. So it's really no different than any other entrepreneur building any business. But it sounds like it's the ability to say no that actually is a real strength. Like, is that something that you look for in entrepreneurs? Like the ability to say, you know what, like there are all these shiny objects and I'm just going to say no to all of them, even if they're exciting and shiny and wonderful. Is that part of the skill set?
Some of the founders that I admire most, I've noticed, do have an incredible ability to say no. I actually I think that's critical for investing, particularly because your job, depending on what your top of funnel looks like, your job is to say no 99.9 or whatever, percent of the time. I think if you're a startup founder, that's not as true. I do think that there's a risk, as I mentioned earlier, that founders go for the shiny object and they fail to stay focused on, launching that MVP into that niche that is a ready market. But at Gainsight, actually, we said yes to everything. Oh, okay. I would say that was like in our DNA to just like say yes. And I think we had the kind of people on the leadership team, and especially in the early days, who could handle that. Like they could handle complexity in like a lot of different areas. And I think that, that saying yes actually was a viable strategy for us to get to a $1 billion plus outcome.
So we're going to be out of time because I really want to talk to you again. But I'd love to see what that means, like say yes a lot and have that actually work out and not go bad. But since we're going to run out of time, I want to ask you the last question I try to ask everybody. If there's one piece of advice you say every great entrepreneur should listen to or a skill set they should acquire, what would it be?
The number one piece of advice I would have would be stay moderately humble. And what I mean by that is that, if you're too humble and you're beating yourself up all the time, you're going to get everyone down. But a certain degree of humility is really important for being able to read your customers accurately, read your employees accurately, read investors accurately. Keep asking questions to make sure that you have the right data set for making decisions, and keep raising the bar, even when you're successful.
Yeah, no, I love all that. It's so true in so many different ways. In Allison, how should people get in touch with you if they are lucky enough to get you on their cap table? How can they even get in touch to try to find you to get you on your cap table? Where can people find you?
They can go to my website at AllisonPickens.com. That's probably pretty easy to remember. There's a lot more information there. And also they can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. And by the way, I highly recommend everyone watching this, read Allison's blog. It's great, filled with so much wisdom. Her book is great. Customer success is critical for everyone to understand, because it's way cheaper to keep a customer than sell a new one, in my opinion. And that's probably the baseline of that. But Allison, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure getting to chat with you. I really appreciate it. Have a fantastic rest of your day. We were going to do a walking talk at some point. So go get that walk in, enjoy yourself, and I will talk to you later.
Great to chat, Adam.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.